The word disbelief just doesn't even cover what people are feeling here today. And I just want to start by saying that a lot of the focus today has been upon the young man who carried out these killings. Police named him relatively early, and at that point in the day, they weren't naming the people who were killed by him. And that was because they were trying to get in touch with the families, understandably, to make sure that they all knew what had happened. This evening, though, they have named those people who were killed last night. Maxine Davison, the mother of the gunman, aged 51. Sophie Martin, aged 3. Her father, Lee. Also, a 59-year-old man, and Kate Shepherd, who is 66. She died at Derriford Hospital last night. The 59-year-old man, Stephen Washington, I should say. In this area, they really are not used to gun crime. I know that because I grew up here. I went to primary school in Keyham, and they're just so unprepared for anything like this scale of thing. And that's really what we found as we've been here today talking to people about it.
You can see that's teenage romance, you know? You don't get that as an adult. If you miss out on that, you miss out on that for life, you know?
2 weeks ago, these are the angry ramblings of Jake Davison, posted online, full of hate. At one point, he says he thinks of himself as the Terminator. Just after 6 yesterday evening, he shot and killed 5 people on the streets around his home in Plymouth. His youngest victim was a 3-year-old child.
An event like this touches all communities, all people, no matter where you are in the world, and the events that I will tell you are particularly traumatic.
This morning, the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall Police spelled out the details of a crime it's hard to contemplate, carried out by a 22-year-old who this police force had deemed suitable and stable enough to hold a gun licence.
Firearms licensing is heavily monitored, heavily regulated, and if someone comes to notice for a criminal instance or mental health issues, often we will take the firearms away, assess and return them. That happens literally every day in the United Kingdom. What policing can't do is just trawl social media looking at people's private lives and what ifs.
According to police, Jake Davison went into a house on Biddick Drive in Keyham just after 6 yesterday evening. There, he shot and killed a 51-year-old woman who was a member of his family. After leaving the house, his next victims were a young girl, aged 3, and a man believed to be her father, shooting and killing them both. He kept going, walking along the street, and then shooting 2 more people. They're in hospital. Police say they're expected to survive. Then, heading on to a nearby park, he killed another man. On Henderson Place, he shot a woman. She died later in hospital. And finally, he turned the gun on himself. It was very late last night when confirmation came from the police of what they called a serious firearms incident. But for several hours before that, there'd been very little information. People who live around here were being told to stay indoors. They weren't being told why. They could, though, see the scale of the emergency response. Multiple air ambulances flying in and armed police on the streets.
My oldest was out and about at the time everything was going on. Very, 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 very scary and unfortunate.
Wesley's garden looks out over the street where the first of the shootings happened. He told me it feels unreal, the scale of loss, but also that the person responsible lived so near.
I believe my sister went to school with him.
What's your sister said about him?
Shocked, absolutely shocked. She said, that in school, although he said a little bit unusual in school, but nothing out of the ordinary. He still played in the groups that everybody else did. He still done everything that everybody else did normally. I don't know if something's changed after he's left school and he's got into some sort of weird stuff off the internet.
Police will investigate the killer's online posts and potential influences in the coming weeks. But the police force has also referred itself to the Independent Office for Police Conduct over the decision to grant the 22-year-old a firearms licence and contact police had with him before he carried out the mass shooting. We know that this young man had a gun licence. Something went wrong here, didn't it?
I think it did. The police need space to understand why the shooter did what he did, how he was allowed to have access to a firearm in those circumstances, and so public trust in the system can be restored.
There are already many questions about what happened, and there will inevitably be more. But there is from some an understandable feeling that no answers can ever help understand why.
Well, joining me now are Luke Pollard, who's the MP for this area, and Father Richard Silk, who's been leading the effort to support people here. Thanks both of you for joining us on an incredibly difficult day. Father Richard, you look back at that little patchwork of houses and it's really hard to imagine what unfolded in a matter of minutes there.
Life changed very quickly last night. The sounds of helicopters and police, sirens, and then the response of people asking questions. There was very quickly came about, followed by a time of quietness. Last night in this area, it's extraordinarily quiet, as people were unaware and afraid of what was going on. And again this morning, there was a kind of pool of uneasiness, but yet calm across the area. And today, as the day's gone on and we've learnt a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, we've had a time to kind of reflect and think about what's happening. So I think we're still very much in early stages of taking in what has happened around here in what is a very sort of intimate and close-knit community which we've heard of before. We know what our neighbours, we know our friends.
And what is clear, as some of the details emerged today, really sad, terrible details, a 3-year-old girl, the youngest victim. But the community has moved quickly to offer help and support to each other.
Yes, clearly. At Ford Primary School, just a short distance up the road there, we've already set up a centre there for people to come in and have counselling, bereavement counselling, or to come in and talk about whatever is necessary. And certainly within the school, we're able to reach out into the families and offer that conduit back to the services which are being offered by the council and the police and other agencies along with the church and the very good staff in the school. So that's happened extraordinarily quickly. And also with the community centres also opening up through St Mark's and other places.
Luke Pollard, I mean, I don't know whether you heard our reporter Claire Fallon say she grew up here. No city in the world expects or is ready for something like this. But Plymouth, it just doesn't really compute, does it, this sort of event here?
It really doesn't. I mean, we're a safe city, and as a community here in Keyham, it is a community where people know their neighbours, they look out for one another, your family lives nearby. It really is a tight-knit community in the way that we often describe communities as being in the past. Well, that's how it is now. And so we don't expect a mass shooting anywhere, but in a community like this, I think it has taken a lot of people the entire day, and it will take them a lot longer to understand, to kind of process that a mass shooting could take place here, and a mass shooting involved the killing of a small child. I think it's going to be a very hard time for lots of us to understand what that means and to make sure that we are dealing with it properly.
And I know both of you have spent the whole day talking to people, listening to what they have to say. What have they been saying?
Nothing yet. There was I think people were holding off until we learnt more facts about what had happened and the people involved. There'd been a real restraint until this evening now. I think we're talking more openly about it because I think that cautiousness that people wanted to look after one another, not speak up, not speculate, which was a message taken on very well. That's been that's what I've experienced most today. And that, of course, is about caring for the community. That is about caring for one another, avoid the gossip, find out, and then we will encounter those problems which we will certainly come across as the weeks to come.
This incident raises some really, really difficult questions, though, doesn't it? The much wider questions. We know this man had a gun licence. We don't know for sure that it was for the gun that he used. But there are very big questions now, aren't there? Should this man have been given a licence, given some of the things we know he was saying online?
That's exactly right. There is a national debate, I think, around gun licence laws and about safety and about how angry young men online are developing. But for me, the two main questions that emerge from the people I'm speaking to here in Plymouth today are how did this happen and why did this happen here? And that's where the police investigation needs to be thorough in understanding where that is. And I think there's a temptation sometimes for politicians to jump to a knee-jerk, something must be done.
You must be worried about the gun licensing question.
Oh, absolutely I am. But the way that we will get a better system is to allow the police to have the space to investigate properly. I think just as we didn't want people speculating about the events last night, what I don't want politicians to do and government ministers is to jump to a knee-jerk policy solution. We need to take time to understand what has happened here, how this happened, and then to explore whether that is happening on a bigger level, because only then will we get something that actually works.
You also touch on a very, very interesting point that I know is being talked about across the country, and that is, as you say, angry men, angry young men. This man had an internet history full of angry, vitriolic rants against women. And there are some people who say, you know, the police were very quick to say this isn't a terrorist incident. But the very fact that it seems to have been fueled in part by hatred against women, that should be a form of terrorism.
It's very sad that somebody can be caught up by such extreme literature and extreme views. It is something for us as a society to look further into. And to, as Luke says, to rush straight into it now is only a sticking plaster. There's obviously clearly something deep down which can attract people who are in a very difficult, lost place and bring them in to do something which is utterly beyond normal thought or even an inkling of doing something like this.
And perhaps you already hinted what your answer to this question will be. You don't want knee-jerk responses, but there is a question surely about the role of internet companies, about how this material is allowed to stay online and these people go uninterrupted.
I think there is. I mean, we're at a time when hate is rising in our societies. It's palpable. You can feel it, not in the last 24 hours, but over the last years and years. And I think what we need to do as a city here, but more that as a country, is to understand why hate is rising, how we can challenge it in a way that doesn't just put petrol on the flames, doesn't just give the trolls another reason to come at you, to find a way of saying, look, there's a lot that we have in common. There's a lot that actually this country can be proud of. So let's start with that and then build it up, because what we can't have is hate winning the day here.
And that, of course, is a role for the politicians, for all of us, isn't it?
For all of us, I think, in an extraordinary counter to that, today what we've seen here have been people being concerned about one another in a way which has been extraordinary. Last night the internet came alive with messages saying, how are you? Are you safe? Are you indoors? The message after message after message. People checking up on their neighbours. There were still people nervous of coming out of their houses even now in this area who are being checked up on by loved ones and people they don't know. There is, within all of this sadness and tragedy and darkness we've encountered, there is a real goodness of humanity here in Plymouth and elsewhere, which is rescuing us in small ways from this time.
And in the next coming days and weeks, what happens here? What can be done to help people?
Well, we need to make sure that the community is supported, and so it's not just the relatives, the families of the victims, or the people who are injured and still in hospital, the people that are within the security cordon that haven't been allowed out of their homes, so not to sully the crime scenes. But it's our whole community here, and you know, sometimes after the cameras leave, that community can be forgotten about. This community is a strong community. There is real heart in Keyham. There's a real sense of community spirit. We need to make sure that as a community, we are backing up each other, we are supporting each other, and that does mean, I think, looking at some of the root causes of this, but to reassure people, to give people the confidence that we can come out of this and still emerge as a strong community at the end of it.
I see your agreement. We can't really hear from you, unfortunately. Very, very brief thoughts.
We've already started looking after each other, and that's the best place.
Father Richard Silk and Luke Pollard, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.